Hello, Savannah. Thanks for tuning in to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And thank you for being here with me for Real Estate Real Talk again. Julia M. Spencer, broadcasting again live after a 6-week break. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And on today's show, I have some guests here, and they have been guests here at my show before, Louisa and Grant Kay, and they have brought with them Wynn Martin, one of their real estate agents that work with them. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey. And we're going to talk a little bit more about real estate because that's what we all love to do. That's kind of like our thing. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves again? You've been on the show before, but maybe some of the listeners haven't listened to previous shows, so go ahead and
I'm Grant Kate with Amass Property Investments.
I'm Louisa Kate with Amass Property Investments as well.
And I'm Wynn Martin with Veslet Realty.
All right. And you, I know I had you, Louisa and Grant, on the show before because back, I want to say a couple months ago, I received a flyer because you tried to buy one of my properties in town. And I was really curious about what it was all about because it looked like a handwritten note at the time. So I brought you guys on the show before because we wanted to talk a little bit about your strategy on how you make money with real estate. And you have like a rehabbing business where you actually find these distressed properties, maybe distressed owners, and people that maybe don't have the money to upgrade their properties and sell them for what it's worth, and you kind of help them out of their bad situations and things like that. You want to just talk a little bit about overview of your business? Is that kind of like describes it well, or?
Yeah, that was that's pretty much the gist of it. We do look for properties that that need some help or owners that need some help, and in fact, in the last two properties that we did, we had one property that the very nice lady and her mom had this house, and it still had about 15 years on the mortgage, and her mom had a crippling stroke and had been taken to the hospital and had never returned to the house. And she was stuck with a mortgage payment plus all of her mother's bills plus all of her own bills, and she and her husband were on disability themselves. So they were at the point where they couldn't even make another mortgage payment. And we were able to come in. We gave them what I think was a very fair price for the house, and they got out from under a really catastrophic situation. And we were able to. The house was in relatively nice shape. We were able to put some money into it, and it'll be on the market in the very near future. And in another case, we had a guy who had inherited a house. It is the house that he'd grown up in. He tried to keep it rented, and it was nothing but a money pit for him. And we offered him a cash number for the house. He accepted that, and that property is about halfway through the renovation. So there's two examples of people who were in various levels of distress with properties in various levels of distress that we were able to help out, and actually turn the neighborhoods around a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good thing because if you can help people out and basically take those properties off their hands that maybe problem properties for them, you are saving them from foreclosure or maybe bad credit, so they can still later on, save their credit and maybe get another property or another home later on, which maybe they couldn't do if the house would go to a bank and be foreclosed on.
That's absolutely true. And in fact, a lot of people look at their house as a lifeboat, but when they get really underwater and they're really in financial straits, the house becomes a millstone around their neck and it's drowning them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can help people that way, and make a couple of bucks in the process, then that's a good deal for both sides.
It's a win-win for everyone.
We won't do a deal unless it's a win-win.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's awesome.
No, we absolutely will not take advantage of anybody. And there's a lot of people out there that will, but we won't do that.
That's good. And that's actually also kind of like the motto of your company, Emmaus Investment Properties. Is according to the Bible, I guess. It's one of the Bible. Go ahead and explain that.
Well. We got the name from Amass because we believed that before we both found God, that we had been walking and God had been walking with us the whole time, just like the story of Amass in the last chapter of the book of Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're really dedicated. don't get me wrong, I would like to make a profit, and we don't do this. It's not completely altruistic, but we're really dedicated to making certain that that whatever we do is a good deal for all parties concerned. And that's one of the reasons why Win Martin has been such a great fit for our company, because he lives his life the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we end up having is, the motto of the company is Ephesians 2:8-9, which is, "For grace I have been saved through faith, not of myself. It is the gift of God, not of my own works, lest anyone should boast." And we really try and run the business that way.
Excellent, excellent. So, Win is your first name, right?
Yes.
Win Martin.
Yep.
Okay.
Win is my first
You're
name.
actually from Toledo, Ohio, right? And you
I am.
graduated from U.S. Military Academy at West Point. So why don't you talk a little bit about your background and what made you get into real estate?
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. I went to West Point, graduated in 1999. Was stationed down here at Fort Stewart. When I transitioned out of the Army in the mid-2000s, got into various jobs here locally, mostly kind of sales jobs. The whole time, though, I was buying and investing in real estate, rental properties, rehab properties, things like that. I was doing it myself, doing it for my friends. My classmate and good friend Rich Blends owns Veslet Realty up in Atlanta, and he had been asking for years to open up a branch down here, and I said, no, it's all right. But finally, about a year and a half ago, we decided to open up a Savannah branch, and now full-time, that's what I do, real estate full-time. Love doing it, love helping people out, whether it's investors like Grant and Louisa, or folks who are just looking to buy or sell a house.
And we actually had a little chat about that right before the show. We were kind of discussing, or actually wondering, that might be a good thing to talk about, is there a big difference between helping individuals find a home versus investors? Because Louisa and Grant here are investors, so they have very special needs and very special objectives, versus a home buyer who's really looking just to buy a home to live in.
That's a great question, and there is a pretty stark difference between the two. When you work with investors, most of the investors that you work with are numbers oriented. It doesn't really matter the type of property, the location of the property, if the numbers work, whether it's a property for them to rent or if it's a property for them to renovate. It's all based on the numbers. When you work with a home buyer, somebody trying to find a house, it's all feeling where you're going to be living, where you're going to be, putting your head with, safety and schools and all those things. And the profit margins don't really matter when it's a home occupant. So when you're dealing with the two, there is quite a difference between that.
So do you primarily work for buyers or sellers, or is it both?
I work with both. When I started, I was more heavy on the buyer side, just because you're new to the market and getting your name out there. Now it's a good balance that I have, with buyers and sellers. So I think it's probably 60% buyers right now and about 40% sellers.
All right, cool. And so, do you think it's easier to find homes for investors versus individual homeowners?
That's a tough question. If you lined up 10 investors, they would all have 10 different strategies on exit strategy, 10 different strategies on how to do what they're looking to do. So depending on what that individual investor is looking for, it could be easier or harder to find. So there's not a one answer for that, because just like each homeowner would be different, each investor is going to be different too with how they do things.
So how are Louisa and Grant, are they easier ones or they're harder ones to
We're
deal?
the hardest.
We're the harder. I would say
great.
we're hard.
They're great. The one thing that I really appreciate about Grant and Louisa is this is what they do full time. They are full-time real estate investors. They don't have a job, 9-to-5 job, and on the side they kind of do a little bit of this and this. This is what they do the whole time. So it makes it easy for me to work with them, because one, we get along great, and two, they're very upfront with what they're looking for, how they're looking to do it, and there's no confusion on what kind of properties they're looking for.
Well, I think there's great communication, and I think that's really important. The reason both Louisa and I immediately said we're hard is because the properties that we're looking for, it's a relatively narrow target, And the reason is because, especially in this market with relatively low selling prices and relatively high prices for rehab, it's a very narrow margin that we have to shoot for. In other markets where there's more houses for sale, more houses that are in distress for sale, maybe fewer investors, and higher after repair values, the target is much wider. So for Wynn, the reality of the situation is that between all of our efforts to find houses, for every house we put under contract, we look at and probably walk through 100 houses or more to find one. So I know that wears out a lot of Wynn's shoe leather, but
Is that actually
It's
you
all part of the
walking
job.
to the houses and looking at them, or just like kind of looking at the sheet, the MLS sheet, I guess, the summary
Well,
sheet?
some of
or-
them we weed out that way. Some of them we can send him an address and he can say, no, it's not worth even looking at it. You're not going to be able to sell it for what you're going to have to put
Okay.
into it. Others, though, it's really hard to see from pictures what kind of repairs need to be done. You really need to walk through a house if you're going to even consider it. So we usually get a list together of our considerations and then head out for a day and we'll walk through, 10,
houses
5, 10 a day.
in a day.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that makes it challenging is that we don't do partway rehabs. We rehab the house so that it's absolutely beautiful. And in order to do that, we have to have sufficient enough delta between what we can sell it for when it's fixed and what we can bring it to market for. And so that's one of the reasons why that's the case. Now, when we first started, we literally walked through every house, because we didn't know the neighborhoods that well, and we didn't really know the business that well. But as we've done this more and more, we can look at a house and based on the after repair value and what we can see in the pictures, we will weed out houses that way. So maybe we only actually walk through 50 for every one we put under contract, but we review at least 100 houses for every one we put under contract.
So that's actually a good point to make for beginner investors, that it's actually really important to maybe walk through every house that you're presented with or that you come across at first, because then you can start getting like maybe a plan together of the things that you want to look at. Like I want to look at the air conditioning, the roof, and I want to look at the plumbing. And then once you have that little checklist in your head, I guess, or maybe you can even put it on a piece of paper, that you can easily weed out the ones that don't match that checklist to begin with. Is that how you experienced it?
Yeah,
Like
there's
the
no-
more you looked at, the easier it was?
There's no substitution for actually getting into the house and looking, because whether it's one picture, and a lot of times when we look at houses, there's just one picture, the front of the house. Well, there's normally a reason why there's only one picture.
Yeah, that's
because
another question.
Nobody
I was-
wants to put a bad picture up there, and so you just put one picture of the front. Normally that's a telltale sign of that's not nice inside. But even some of the houses that they do take inside pictures, it's a realtor's job to present it in the best possible way, and so they'll take good angles. They're never going to take a picture of something that's deficient in the house. You're always going to get the goods. And so even though pictures online might look good, there are so many houses we've been through that you just say, man, those pictures, somebody did a great job, because it's not as nice as the pictures seem.
Right. And in
Yeah.
Savannah, you have to worry about mildew. And you can't see mildew necessarily, but boy, you can smell it when you walk into a garage or into a house. If it's really bad in the walls, you'll smell it, and you're never going to see that on any picture. So to walk into a house and say, okay, so that means walls have to come down, insulation has to come out, the mildew has to be remedied, and that gets expensive. So, a house that has that mildew in it is going to cost a lot more than the same exact house with no mildew issues. So.
And the reality of the situation is that although we don't look at things negatively, we have to eliminate properties, and we have to do it as quickly and accurately as we can. So we can look at a property and see what their asking price is and know that there's no way in the world we can do that house because of what we know what it'll sell for in that neighborhood. So we don't even need to walk into that one. When we walk into properties, we're looking, and I don't want this to sound negative again, but we're looking to eliminate properties because we can't buy everyone, and we want to buy ones that are good for the seller, but also that we can make a little bit of money on. And so by the time we actually walk through the property, like Louisa said, we're looking for things like that. And one of the things you were talking about, a new investor, I would highly advise is get yourself, if you don't have a construction background, if you aren't in the business redoing the houses, walk through with a general contractor that you trust, and make sure that you take their word for what things are going to cost, because it's very easy to get go fever in this business and decide that you're going to buy it no matter what. But that's a great way to take an absolute bloodbath in red ink. So that I would highly advise going in with at least somebody really competent in the building trades.
Well, we sat in one the other day, the three of us, and back and forth about what can we cut out, what can we do, because it was going to be a gorgeous house. If we could do it and make it work, it would be absolutely beautiful. But no matter what we did, it still had to have a roof. It still had to have a lot of work in the yard. It still had to have a wall come out to make it a floor plan that people would want to buy these days. And then you got to deal with new floors. If you're taking a wall out, the floors have to be replaced because you can't match hardwood floors. And no matter what we did, unless we just went in and left it exactly like it was and painted it and put new carpet down, but that still wasn't gonna it wouldn't have made it sell because the floor plan wouldn't have been right. So it's hard, and sometimes we'll sit there and try really hard, and then finally we were like, okay, we've been at this for an hour, it's not going to work. No matter what we do, we can't make it work. So,
and that process of that kind of back and forth between Louisa and myself. Louisa's in charge of style. I'm in charge of making sure we don't lose money. Wynn's in charge of being able to sell it after the fact. And Chris, who we'll introduce you to later, he's in charge of getting it done and keeping it on the budget as the contractor. So we'll have those conversations before, but we also have that conversation after we've bought the property, because we still have to do a scope of work in order to get the property done. So that's another level of complexity on top.
Yeah, and also I would throw in, not only for having a general contractor for a first timer or somebody who's new, link up with a realtor, because you can have a great house in a great location, but if you don't know what the after repair value is going to be and you don't know what you're going to sell it for, you could get kind of in hot water real quick if you overestimate your own values of the neighborhood. You'll spend all this time and money and you won't be able to sell it because you either overdid the rehab or you're just have it priced too high for the neighborhood.
And I would say make sure that your realtor knows about investors, because we have talked to other realtors before we met Wynn that don't understand investing, and so they could not understand the concept. But this is a really good deal. It's $50,000 off of asking. It is a really good deal if I'm buying that house to move into myself, make some renovations, and then move in on my own. It is. But for an investor, it is not a really good deal. So I would say, yes, a realtor, but make sure that it's a realtor that deals with investors. Yeah.
And that's all of that's particularly important in a market like Savannah. Because again, the best thing about the market in Savannah is the prices are low. And the worst thing about the market in Savannah is that the prices are low. So what you end up with is you can very easily overbuild a rehab in Savannah. If I start rebuilding, if I buy a $160,000 after repair value house and I start rebuilding it the way I would want it to live in, and I start putting granite counters in and I start putting expensive, really high-end appliances, I'm going to get murdered, because no matter what I do to that house, maybe I can bump it from 160 to 165, but I'm never going to get it to 200,000. Because the constraints of neighborhood are very tight in this market.
So you actually all of you brought up a good point about how to value a property and finding the right person that can value it correctly for you. Because I've always had this question from subscribers, investors: how do you come up with the number to sell a house for? So that would be a question for you.
Yeah, so the best way to do it is do a CMA, a comparative market analysis. So you look the last 6 months of what has sold similar houses in the same neighborhood, and you try and get as close to the target house as possible. So you want to have probably 3 or 4 comparable houses that you can confidently say this is what they've sold for, yours is like that, so it'll sell about that. So there's your baseline. And then of course, you look at all the finishes and how nicely it's done, and there's going to be a premium on that. So if everything in the neighborhood sold for 150, but they were all basic builder grade materials, and we do a nice rehab and put very nice finishes, and it's all new and everything. Well, then of course it's probably not going to sell for 150. It's going to sell for more. How much more? That's where kind of the art form of trying to figure out where it fits into that puzzle lies. It's probably not going to go to 200,000 like you had said with that last example, from 160 to 200. But yeah, you look at all that. But the important thing is your realtor that you link up with should be doing that for you, or you need to be asking them to do that for you. Because at the end of the day, it's the banks are going to be loaning the money. And the banks need to appraise it. And an appraiser is going to come out.
That was my question.
Yeah. So we could have a house for 160. We list it for 200. The purchaser says, yes, I'll pay you 200. The bank's going to come out and say it's only worth 160. I'm only going to loan you 160 on that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it does no good. So it doesn't really matter what the buyer or the seller think it's worth. It only matters what the bank thinks it's worth. And the appraiser that comes out, they're all independent now. Banks don't have appraisers in their pocket anymore like they used to. And they'll come out and they'll pull the same comps that I'm pulling. They're going to pull those same 3 or 4 houses that sold over the last 6 months. And they're going to do the square footage. They're going to do the same analysis. And they're going to come up with a price. And they'll put the same premiums that I am on the new wood and this granite or, all these various things. And they'll come up with a number of X. And if that number X does not match with what the buyer and seller agreed to, that's a problem. So, it's just very important to do that analysis to find out what that ARV is. And of course, you want to try and, the goal is to sell the house for the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time. That's whether you're selling it yourself, whether you're an investor, whether you're a buyer, you always want to get the best deal. And there's a line at which you can, there's a fine line between too much and not enough. Because most people are value shoppers. They look for value in not only in a house, but they'll look for a value in a car, in a restaurant. Everybody wants to buy something for value. And so if you can provide a value product at a good price point, that house is going to sell quicker than one that's overpriced that people don't see value in. So, yeah.
And a lot of times Gwen will walk us through houses that are already up for sale, that somebody has redone or that an individual is selling. And so if we're looking at a house in that neighborhood, we'll go through those houses and compare to see what we're going to do to the house versus what they're doing and what they're asking, and do we think they're going to get what they're asking with what they've done. So for example, some people will not touch the floors and they'll have older tile in there, but then they'll put new appliances, and so we'll look at that and say, well, this is what's happening, and it's been on the market for 6 months and it's not selling. Or we'll look at another one and say, wow, this one hasn't been on the market very long, it's already got several offers on it, and they left this, and this, so we don't necessarily have to do certain things in this neighborhood. So it just depends. It really helps too to walk through houses that are already up for sale.
It's all market intelligence. We try and make certain that we make good decisions. And again, because if you take a look just at the last 3 projects that we've done okay with that, because in each case the house actually sold for I think an average of like 14 or 15% above the base comp in the neighborhood. So we pushed the comps, but we also got more across those 3 properties. We got, and these are the 3 we did with Wynn. We got more than what we asked for the property. And in each case, even though it exceeded the comp by 15%, the bank had no problem with the comp, and so they approved the loan. And we must have had it priced about right, because I don't think we could have pushed it any more and gotten the bank to approve. And the longest any of those 3 houses stayed on the market was 9 days. Yeah,
you told me that before. That was a great point. So I'm going to just interrupt really briefly because I have to run my announcements here. But I have a couple more questions about these improvements and kind of like what you think are the ones that kind of everybody goes for, because you mentioned floors and stainless steel appliances. Some of the things that you've consistently see kind of needs to be done on the house for today, because you also mentioned like this is not a floor plan that normal people would buy today, so I'm kind of interested what that would be. But let me run some announcements and we'll be right back here with Louisa and Grant Kay and Wynn Martin here of Emmaus Property Investments, and we'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Rob Hessler.
And I'm David Laughlin.
Join us for 300 and Under, a group art show featuring work by 40 artists, many of whom have been featured on our show, Art on the Air, which airs Wednesdays from 3 to 4 p.m. on WRUU.
This art show is a fundraiser for this all-volunteer nonprofit radio station. The opening reception will be 5 to 8 p.m. on Friday, August 10th, with a wide variety of great talent from our local creative community.
That's at Location Gallery at 417 Whitaker Street. For more information, look for 300 and Under or Location Gallery on Facebook.
WRUU 107.5 FM is all volunteer community radio. Tune in this afternoon. From 3 to 4, Rob Hessler and David Laughlin present Art on the Air, an interview program dedicated to the visual arts in Savannah. From 4 to 6, Louis Clausey and Matthew Adams present That Old Savannah Magic, a variety show featuring Savannah history, radio theater, interviews, and music. From 6 to 7, Barbara Humphreys and Albert Strickland present Voices of Resistance, giving voice to justice and peace activists with no other voice in the Savannah media. Find our full schedule at wruu.org.
For 10 days in August, WRUU 107.5 FM will be auctioning off more than $3,000 worth of fun and unique items to raise money to support this nonprofit community radio station. WRUU radio hosts have worked hard to gather items to delight and dazzle. From August 11th through the 21st, you can bid on gift cards and certificates for great local restaurants and bars, art, theater, fitness, and much more. Browse the catalog today. Every purchase will help WRUU continue to bring you Savannah's most diverse and passionate radio programming. Look for the summer business auction at WRUU.org.
And thank you for being back with Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. Hello, Savannah. You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And here in the studio with me today are Louisa and Grant Kay from Emmaus Properties, together with Wynn Martin, their real estate agent, or the agent that works with them in order to find properties. And we were just talking about some of the processes and some of the ways that you conduct your business, basically. And one of my questions I had right before the break was, what are some of the things that buyers primarily look for? I guess that's more a question for you. What kinds of things are kind of a must-do to remodel a house that people look for, that buyers just have to have these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot. Most buyers in this market, I would think in any market, really appreciate and look for things that, one, are new, because when you're buying a house, you want new stuff. But kitchens and bathrooms are the biggest areas that people can focus putting their money into to make it look nice, because that gives you the best return, best bang for your buck. Depending on the area of town, in the historic district, keeping some of the original wood, as much of the original features as you can. Out in maybe in the south side or midtown, where that's not as historic, you'd be looking at new flooring, new kitchens, some bathrooms, and of course, nowadays everybody wants an open floor plan. So the builders are building them now open, but a lot of the homes that we run across were built in the 70s, 80s that didn't have that open floor plan, and so that entails opening it up.
60s.
60s,
50s,
40s. That's true. Opening up walls to try and make that floor plan more open.
So you do still get a return for your investment if you start knocking down walls to open a kitchen into a dining room or something like that?
Absolutely. The price of taking down a wall is well worth it when you look at the value that it's going to add by opening that space up. You'll be able to get more on the top end simply by opening up a wall.
Wow.
Although one thing I would caution, because I've seen this actually happen, make certain that it's not a load-bearing
Yes,
wall.
yes,
And
absolutely.
if you can't do that yourself for certain, then make sure that you have your general contractor tell you that it's not a load-bearing wall. Because when you start taking them out unprepared, you can do real damage to the property. It can cost you tens of thousands of dollars to fix.
Don't
You're laughing. Did that happen to you, or have you seen that?
No, we've seen it in properties. We've
Oh.
not had it happen to us because, we have a really good contractor that we always have walk through before we start anything. And he, most of the time we know, but we always check with him to make sure that we think, we really know what we think.
When Wynn and I look at it, we can be 90 or 95% certain that this is not a load-bearing wall because I'll get up in the attic and look, and you can tell by thumping the wall itself. But I'm still not ripping out a wall until I talk to the contractor.
We've been in many homes that have been redone to some extent, and you see the sagging, and it's whoever did that, whether it was themselves doing it or a contractor that maybe didn't do it quite right, but you see some sagging. Sagging
We had a
walls.
property that we picked up in Wilshire Estates that was a 1,500 square foot, just a ranch. It was a nice little house, but when we bought it, it was tiny little rooms. You walked into the living room, and it was a tiny little dark living room, and there was a tiny little room that would be a dining room right next to the kitchen, and then back into an open family room that had been added some years later. And when we took the wall out between that dining room and that tiny little living room, it changed the makeup of that house tremendously. And it cost maybe $2,500 or $3,000 in order for us to do that. But I guarantee you we got $10,000 more for that house because of the open floor plan. And the house went off the market immediately. So
Good. So it's also good to, you mentioned that you do a lot of the design and picking of the colors. I'm guessing that's kind of like your
Yeah.
is there because I've seen a lot of houses that are like from the 70s and 80s as well, and the color scheme is brown, mostly brown and beige, and I guess in the 80s there was a lot of pastel going around too. Does every decade, I guess you've been in the business for like more than 10 years, does every decade have a different fashion?
It does. Not only design of the house themselves, you can tell decade by decade what was in at the time. And there will be a time in 30 years from now when we'll be selling houses and people say, oh, open floor plan. Oh, that's awful. I want a closed small living room and a closed small, everything's probably cyclical. But with colors, not just the layouts and the floor plans, but you'll go in and notice. You can pick out right away what
Tiles?
The tile size and color and orientation and colors and the fixtures. Gold fixtures were huge, back in the 80s. Now it's just a dated look.
right.
Everybody
everything's
wants
brushed nickel today.
now. Everybody
this-
wants grays or light tan, linen colored walls. Whereas in the 90s, it was all that really dark tan and, almost like a sable color.
Wall size mirrors in the bathroom
Right.
was what it was in the 90s, and today it's more.
Of a framed mirror.
Like a
Frame
framed
mirror,
mirror.
yeah, exactly.
So-
Okay, wow. I need to start making some notes here. I have a lot of the old style still.
And some of that's really easy. Some of that's like, that doesn't cost anything to take down the old mirror and put up one with a, a frame around it. So,
Yeah.
and light
Skim
fixtures.
coat the wall and paint it, and buy an $80 mirror at Home Depot.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep, that's a cheap
and
fix.
yet it changes the entire personality of that bathroom instantly.
It does. Yeah.
Great information. So the other thing that we talked about that I wanted to kind of share with the listeners here in Savannah is kind of like, or maybe you can just talk about the whole process from beginning to end of what you do, decide what the decisions you make to bring a house from finding it, I guess, or even before finding it, looking for it, and to the market until it sells. I mean,
it's a multi-step process because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the neighborhood and we're going to take a look at the address and get whatever pictures we can, try and make a determination whether what they're asking for it, what we can give them for it, and what we could sell it for once it's fixed, if there's enough of a delta there for us to go further. And if there is, then and sometimes we can't do this all together, but at one point or another, Chris who's our contractor, Louisa and I and Wynn will all walk through that property and try and make a determination on what can be done. In a perfect world, the four of us go in there before we make an offer, and we come up with, first of all, what's the after repair value and what are we going to make the house look like? And it's in very general terms. Okay, we know that it's going to cost us this much per square foot for floor, and it's going to need all new floors. And we know we're going to have to put a roof on it because it's leaking or because the shingles are curling or whatever. We know we're going to have to do this, 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 and this. And we literally stand there with a pad and a calculator, and we start adding up what those cost.
So my question to you then is, sometimes there's a wide variety of prices for certain things, because you can put just a regular 15-year shingle roof on, and you can also put a really nice metal roof on, which probably is about twice as much. Where and how do you decide which choice you make in terms of remodeling?
Well, typically we never use builder grade shingles. We always use architectural shingles. And unless we went into a property that was really a high-end property, we wouldn't even consider a metal roof unless we were replacing one. Again, because of the cost factor.
Yeah.
And if you've got 150, and Wynn can probably speak to this better than I can, but if you have a $150,000 to $200,000 house, if you put a metal roof on it, which is going to double or triple the cost of the roof job, might be $25,000 to put a metal roof on that thing. I don't think you're going to get payback on that investment.
No, and that's kind of my question. Where and how do you decide what to put on? Because you kind of like are in that little area where, okay, we don't want to put just the cheapest on there because then it's going to look cheap and people are not going to sell it. Your buyers are going to say, yeah, not this one. And how do you make that decision? Is that like
we don't even consider putting on builder grade shingles.
Okay.
Architectural shingles are much better choice.
So you have a
they
set.
last longer, and the difference, the delta in the price there is not very great. You know, if I'm going to spend $7,000 on a roof, why not spend $8,300 on the roof and put on architectural shingles? That's not going to make or break the deal, but it may very well make or break who buys it. Because again, there's a big difference in how long they last and how they look and all of that stuff.
Well, one of the things when we look at houses, you look at the market, who's the buyer pool? So you look in the neighborhood for conformity. If all the houses have just normal shingles, putting a metal roof on it, you would stick out kind of like a sore thumb. And so you definitely want to make sure that you want your house to stand out for the good, not for the bad. So you look at it, you want to be somewhat conforming in the neighborhood to what that looks like. But at the end of the day, when it comes to price of rehab and do you do low, mid, or high grade, you look at the buyer pool, who's going to be buying it. So if you have a fairly moderately priced home where a whole bunch of people can afford it, you really don't need high-end granite or slate and stainless steel top of the line appliances because that's not really what your market is. If you have a house that's in the $300,000-$500,000 range, that buyer's going to be expecting higher end finishes. And so you kind of look at each project, the location where it's at on the map. You look at who the buyer pool is going to be, and then you determine, do we need granite or can we just do solid surface, or do we need Formica, countertops? Do we need all these different things? Does it need to be actual hardwood? Can it be engineered? Can it be laminate? Can it be the new LVT? What are the flooring? And it's all based on. And you guys are working together basically to decide that before you even start any kind of.
Before we even make an offer.
That's great.
Because if you don't do all that ahead of time, it more than likely is going to be a recipe for disaster.
Right.
And so as we go through and we make that list, we're looking at, because we've already gotten what after repair value would be. And then the other thing that's really interesting, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad Wynn brought it up, is that just because it's a $145,000 ARV house, that doesn't mean we're not going to make it look beautiful. We're still going to make certain that every switch plate is pristine, that every switch is pristine, that they're all identical and matching, that there are no breaks in the paint, that there are no breaks in the floor, that when you walk into the place, it pops. And that's a mark of the ones that we do. And that's because we're willing to spend that extra $500 on that house in order to make sure that all of the switch plates match. And so as we go through that process, all of that is considered, and then we take a look at the bottom line, and can we make enough money to make certain that if something bad happens, because you never know until you open up the walls, that we're not going to get murdered in it. As long as we can see that we've got a good chance at making a decent profit margin but not getting hurt, then we'll move forward with it. And then if we get the property, then there's a whole nother process that begins.
But we rely on Win a lot for what kinds, like materials are selling, because he walks through the house with people that are buying houses every day, and he hears them say, and he listens for that kind of stuff. The wife will say, well, I don't really care if it's real hardwood floors. I just want them to look good. So, so then we take that and we say, okay, in this price range, people don't really care if it's real hardwood versus the laminate or versus the vinyl planking that looks like hardwood, but you can mop it and put standing water on it and it doesn't hurt it. So we look for those kind of things to help us, and then I'll go and I'll take that, okay, we're going to go with vinyl planking, and then I'll go out and pick, colors to go with that. But I rely on him a lot for materials that are selling. You see a lot when you go to the Home Depot and Lowe's and any of the high-end stores. You see a lot of this new quartz, countertopping. And I keep saying, well, everybody's talking about quartz. And Wynn says, well, I don't hear any of the buyers talking about quartz. So do we need to do that? They're okay with Formica. Or no way, they don't want that. They want the granite. So, so I do rely on that a lot, because just because it's selling in the magazines doesn't necessarily mean that that's what people in this market want or care about. And so it doesn't. We could use that stuff, but why would you if people aren't expecting it?
Yeah, exactly.
So
you're just throwing profit margin away.
right.
HGTV has been great, and it's also been terrible.
Right.
Yes.
Everybody looks HGTV.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah, in different markets, and in the Las Vegas or Dallas or New York or LA market are all different. I mean, real estate is local, and what you see on TV doesn't necessarily equate to our market here.
Yeah, I
So-
see the shows where they have a $1 million house with a $500,000 remodeling budget. It's like, okay, that's not reality. I mean, a lot of times.
Not here.
Maybe in that
isn't
market.
It isn't in this market. But that's a very important thing to remember in a market like Savannah, is that it is very easy to overbuild that rehab. And if I have a property that the base ARV after repair value is going to be $150,000, I can make it nice enough to maybe get $165 for it, which is what has been our track record. But no matter what I do to it, I'm not going to get $175. I can put granite. I can do everything but pave the thing in gold, and I'm not going to get more than $165 for it. So anything I go beyond that, I'm just wasting our profit margin. So.
But having a nice product on the back end is key, and that's what makes working with Grant and Louisa at Emmaus, it's so easy selling on the back end, because it is such a good product that everybody, all the homes that have sold, the feedback has been tremendous with how nice it is. Just people have been going gaga over the houses, which make it easy on me on the back end selling it, knowing that it's a good house done well, with good value, with all the nice
Quality
fixtures.
materials.
Having a good product on the back end is key. At the end of the day, 3 things will sell a house: price, condition, and location. And you can't change your location of your house. Well, most of the times you can't change the location of your house. So the location is set, but the price and the condition you can alter, whether it's an investor altering it to resale, or if it's a homeowner altering it to sell it themselves. Pricing it appropriately and making it, look nice, and the condition of it are key. So price, condition, location are the 3 things that'll sell a house in any market, up market, down market. Just keep that in mind.
Well, and that's one of the things that we like working with Wynn, because he's very honest with the people that he goes and sees that want to sell their house about what the true market value is. Because there's a lot of real estate agents out there that'll say, oh yeah, sure. They know that house isn't going to sell for more than $160,000, and they'll say, we can sell this for $250. That's not a big deal. They'll put it on the market for $250, and 3 weeks later, oh, it's not selling. We have to bring that price down. Knowing the whole time that they're going to have them locked into a contract and make them, come down on their price. And so, we rely on Wynn to really be honest and tell us what we can sell it for, but also I think he's really good at that for buyers as well, or sellers.
That's great.
We've been very blessed with the people that we've associated with, in that although I have an agreement with Wynn, What our real agreement is our handshake. And his word is his bond, and my word is my bond. And I have the same relationship with Chris Norman, who's our general contractor. Although we do a scope of work to end any confusion, we should talk about that a little bit, but we do a scope of work to end any confusion, and there is a contract. The contract isn't what really binds us. It's his word and my word. And if I can't have somebody like that to do business with, I don't want to do business.
Well, I have one more question for you. We're actually almost out of time, just a few more minutes. Time just goes flying talking about real estate. What is actually your error margin? That's kind of like a curious question for me, that you kind of factor in of things that could go wrong that you haven't anticipated, but I'm thinking you have some sort of percentage in mind that you kind of factor in your initial estimate and your budget for repairs.
It depends on the age of the house. If we're going into a house that was built in the 1930s and that we know that there's cloth wire in the walls that is going to have to all be ripped out, then we're gonna go with a higher percentage, and we might go 15 or even 20% on the rehab budget as a contingency. If it's a property that is newer and in reasonably decent shape but just needs some tender loving care, we might go as little as 5%.
Okay.
But it would be somewhere in that range.
Well, that's a good point, though, that you actually think about that, because a lot of people go in and they go right to the edge, and then something happens like, okay, I didn't budget for that.
Well, the other thing that people don't consider is, number one, there's holding costs. And one of the things about making the property really nice so that it sells fast is it reduces my holding costs. Because I'm going to have to pay the insurance on it, I'm going to have to pay the taxes on it, I'm going to have to pay the utilities on it. And if I'm borrowing money to do the deal, I'm going to have to pay the interest on it. So holding time is very important as well. And unfortunately, I think some people get in over their head and they never look at what's it going to cost for me to hold this property while I rehab it for the next 6 months, and then how much commission am I going to have to pay to sell this on the MLS? And so if you don't factor in all of those numbers, you can get into a lot of trouble really easily.
Good information. Well, thank you for being on the show. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but I'm really, really glad that you guys came back, and hopefully I can welcome you again in the future. Did you want to just tell the listeners real quick how they can reach you if they have any further questions, websites, phone numbers?
If there's any questions, you can reach us. It's a mass property investments. It's www.epi.investments is the website. www.epi.investments, and our phone number is 912-663-6460 is our phone number. And Win?
Yep, and I can be reached. I work for Vestlet Realty. That's V is in Victor, VESTLET. That's vestletrealty.com, and my phone number is 912-220-9806. If anybody wants to talk, have any questions, feel free to give me a call or shoot me a text. Love to help.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. Thank you, Savannah listeners, for listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Thanks for having tuned into Real Estate Real Talk. My show is on Wednesdays at noon, so feel free to tune in again. We will have this show recorded. We'll have it up on our website here very soon, and check out all the other archived shows as well on WRUU.org. Thank you again for coming to the show, and everybody have a nice Wednesday.
For your free guide to real estate investing, visit juliamspencer.com.